Hello everyone and welcome to this Cambridge Chem webinar. My name is Caroline Greener, I'm the International Marketing Manager at Chem. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are in the UK or in the world today. The title of today's webinar is the Cambridge Wellbeing Check. Before we start, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping with you. Please note that all your microphones are muted. We cannot hear any members of the audience. This is to ensure sound quality. If you would like to ask questions, please post them in the questions section located on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll answer any questions we receive at the end of the webinar. You will receive a certificate of attendance sent to your email inbox 1 hour after the webinar finishes. You'll receive a copy of the webinar recording and the slides sent via email next week. It might be nice if you'd like to use the questions box to tell us where you are joining from today. A little bit about Cambridge Centre for Evaluation and Monitoring, otherwise known as CEM. We've been working with schools for over 30 years in over 100 countries. We're known for evidence-based approach to formative assessments. We work with schools, ministries and associations all over the world. In 2019, we became part of the University of Cambridge. And now we help teachers turn data into knowledge. We bridge the gap between research and practice, and we provide evidence to support good decision making. I'm now going to hand you over to Mark Frazer, who's going to take us through the webinar today.
Thank you very much, Caroline, and welcome along this afternoon. And just very quickly, just before we start, I'd just like to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a former teacher and head teacher, about 18 years working in primary schools up in the northeast of England. And I've been at Chem for about 7 years now, where I'm teaching and learning lead at the moment. Just today, then, very briefly, what we'd like to talk about over the next half hour or so is what well-being is, why we think it's important, why we think we should be assessing well-being. We'll tell you a little bit about our new product, the Cambridge Wellbeing Check, and show you some of the reports. And then just again, put my sort of teacher hat back on a little, at the end, thinking if you've got this information about your students and their well-being, what is it that you can do to improve well-being in your school? So next slide, please. So when I was looking around for the material to put together for this presentation, I was kind of just trawling through the different research that's come out over the last few years, and it was fascinating to come across this OECD document, which basically has quite a positive outlook there. In many ways, life's getting better. The good news is that well-being has, in some respects, improved. This is internationally, and in many places we're living longer, safer lives. However, as you can see, the date is quite interesting, March 2020. Just think back to what was going to happen around about that time. And, to be fair to the writers of this report, they flag that there are indeed storm clouds on the horizon. I mean, we've had 2 years, 3 years nearly of unimaginable circumstances in many ways. Pandemic, got war on our doorstep in Europe, deepening environmental worries, cost of living crisis, fuel poverty, all of these things have since emerged, and who knows what next. And adults and young people alike are arguably far more anxious about daily life than they were just 2 or 3 years ago. But if one good thing has come out from the recent past, it's perhaps that the importance of personal well-being is far more prominent now than it ever has been. But what do we mean by well-being? So I'd just like to move on and think about that question over the next few slides. So in particular, what does well-being mean in the context of school or college? Here's some interesting data. Again, came across, this is quite recently published data, published in a document by the Children's Society, taken from something called the British Household Panel Survey, which is a survey made up of about 5,000 households across the UK. It's an annual survey. And interestingly, it shows quite a stable situation at home for a lot of students. So this is how young people are feeling at home, and also how they feel generally about life in general, but also on the right-hand side there, you can see what they're thinking about in how they're feeling in school. And as you can see, it is a little bit erratic, the school graph there, but does tend to show a downward trend. So recently, Cambridge has been doing quite a bit of work on wellbeing, and here in Chem, if we move to the next slide, we can see a cover of a publication that we've based our most recent work on. So this is a paper produced by some colleagues over in the Faculty of Education, Ros McClelland and Susan Stewart, a few years ago in about 2015. And they reviewed a wide range of literature focusing on young people's well-being in school. And in their paper, they argue that as educators, it's important to investigate well-being in the school context, as if this is understood and more importantly can be changed, then this will enable far more young people to flourish. So the model we've developed from that consists of two main areas: how students are feeling and how students are functioning. And then that's subdivided into 4 areas of well-being, which are described here. So we have life satisfaction, so general satisfaction with life; negative emotions, the tendency to dwell on negative thoughts, be stressed and feel sad perhaps; interpersonal well-being, how students relate to each other and to adults in their school setting; and also competence well-being, how students feel about the skills that they have, their self-confidence, the things that they need to succeed in education. Thank you very much, thanks. So we've got here just a few notes about well-being and what the research tells us. So we know that it is a subjective psychological state, so that means it changes over time, so that's month to month or even day to day, but it also changes from one context to another. And students' well-being might be high at home, as we've seen from that series of graphs a few minutes ago, but perhaps low in school. And because well-being is a psychological state, 2 children in identical material or physical circumstances might experience very different levels of well-being. And that basically means that one child might be happier in school than another, despite their very similar backgrounds. So what do we do about that? If we want to understand well-being, we would suggest that we must ask the students or the children about it. Moving on to the next question: why is well-being in schools important? And I think this is probably one of my key messages today. It's associated with some forms of motivation, for example, wanting to learn and progress. And unsurprisingly, we think students who are well motivated and are feeling very positive are in a good position to learn and make progress. The other side of that coin is that engagement is linked to well-being as well, and if students are disengaged, well, they're likely to be experiencing lower levels of well-being and are perhaps more likely to truant, to skip school, to not attend. As we'll probably agree, that if you're not in school, the chances are your learning is not going to be optimized, and students can very easily get onto a downward spiral. Further evidence comes from a recent paper just presented at a conference in Mexico earlier this month by 2 colleagues from Cambridge, 2 researchers, Drs. Irenka Suto and Dr. Tom Benton. So we've got their paper, which tells us, again, the same sort of message, that there's a link, there's a correlation between well-being and educational performance. Again, this comes from reviewing a range of papers, including the ones here. But more interestingly, and particularly as an ex sort of head teacher here, and hopefully you as teachers and school leaders will find this interesting as well, that there's a strong link between whole school approaches to well-being and attainment, and that is heavily dependent on the way the policy is implemented. So why should we assess well-being in schools? Why should we assess anything in school, I suppose we could ask? Well, we think if you can measure or assess something, you obtain better information about it and increase your understanding of it. And this is true of well-being. So this puts you in a stronger position if you need to make decisions or take action. So our Wellbeing Check, which we've developed recently, has these important uses, which we think would be able to help you in your school setting. It allows you to teach and explore well-being with students, because it comes with some resources, some lesson plans that help you introduce well-being, explain why it's important and what we can do to manage it and improve it. It allows you to evaluate the well-being of individuals and groups of students, and also if you put measures in place after a first round of assessment, you can come back and assess again and evaluate the impact of any interventions that you have put in place. So next slide, please, Caroline. And I'd just like to spend the next few minutes just showing you a little bit about the Wellbeing Check, telling you something about the assessment and the reports. It's a very simple to run Wellbeing Check. It runs on any PC, tablet or laptop. Does not involve any paperwork or marking. It's quick and easy to set up and use. It includes 22 questions, simple questions, which you'll see a couple of examples of in a moment, and it's flexible. It fits around lesson plans and the school day, and you can use it if you subscribe to the service as many times as you would like each year as you need. What I should say as well is it is suitable for children between the ages of 7 and 18. The questions are the same for those children, but the support materials are different. They're tailored to the different age ranges within the age range between 7 and 18. So we've got upper and lower Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, Key Stage 4 equivalent resources. And we think that the questions are incredibly simple. So we've tried to take away the complex language. These are based on the original research. So they've been tried out as part of the original study. And then we've trialed it in various places. And particularly for children who are struggling with their language skills, either because there's a specific learning issue around that, or perhaps English is an additional language for them, we've tried to keep things as simple as possible. So simple question and then 5 responses on this like-it scale, just scale 1 to 5. So the students just click on the appropriate response to each of the questions. And then in previous webinars, when we've done this, we get questions like, how do you know the children aren't just clicking through? Well, there are some little safety nets built in. And again, when you are analyzing your data as a teacher, you can be mindful of this, so that if you see a student has said, when I'm at school, I feel happy, never. But when I'm at school, I feel sad, never. And you've got 2 kind of contradictory answers there. That answers maybe the question that perhaps they've just clicked through this quite quickly and haven't taken it perfectly, as seriously as we'd wanted. So again, not an answer, but a signpost to a particular issue that may be there. And like a lot of these things, we're not diagnosing anything. We're only aiming to shine a bit of light onto an issue that may be a potential problem. So the questions are structured like that. And then if Caroline moves to the next slide, you can see the scale works in one direction for the positively phrased questions and in the opposite direction for the negatively phrased questions. So the negative emotions question is scaled in reverse. That will sort of appear when you see a couple of the reports in a little while. But again, a very simple structure that we think is easy to understand for students and for staff. So you do not have to be a whiz with data in any way. This is very, very simple. And we have quite a wide range of reports. We've got 13 in total at the moment. If we just move to the first example, again, apologies, this might be a little bit small, but when you get the slides, you can zoom in and have a look. But what we've got here is an example of a report just on the individual responses a particular student has given. And as you can see, it's just a tick in a box. So for every question, you can see how that student responded. We do highlight if there are low scores, so where there may be concern. You've got that sort of pink shading and the sort of the red tick there. And again, these are for individuals, but as you'll see as we move through, we've got reports for individuals, for groups of children, for classes, for year groups, split by gender, and so on. So the next example, please, Caroline. So as well as, thank you, as well as the tick box, we present the data like this in many ways. So this is a summary for an individual student. Again, this is just for the eyes of teachers mainly, and you can see how the average score has been, how the average response has been provided in each of the 4 areas. But I've got an example here where you can see negative emotions is distinctly different from the rest of the responses. And again, it's an extreme example here, but just using this to illustrate that if there are concerns hidden here, we do our best to highlight them. This is not something that we would suggest you gave to the students. We have a different version for students, but again, this is confidential for teachers, that you can see that perhaps there is a burning issue here that you need to have a conversation with this particular student about. Again, not exposing anything in particular, but just it's an average score from that particular section, and it's a conversation starter. So this, again, a little bit more detail here. This just gives you by group, so you could have all the children in your class, your pastoral group, your tutorial group, and you can see how they've responded. Again, just for those people who want to see a little bit more detail, so it's just a bit more finer grained. And again, we draw attention to the especially low responses. We can split by gender, and also we have kind of prefer not to say other category as well, which can be revealed on some of these reports. But again, just a little bit more detail if you want to drill down and see how different groups are responding to the sort of the range of questions, just to see if there are any kind of gender related problems. This is quite detailed. So this shows for every question, so we've just got 3 examples here, but for every question you get a breakdown as to the proportion of students who've responded in each of the 5 categories here. And as you can see, the first 2 questions, everything's sort of fairly neutral to positive, but here we've got the 3rd question there. I feel I'm doing well. And in this particular group, you've got some red there. So we're highlighting the fact that there's about 20% of students are feeling quite negative some of the time there. So again, not providing any particular answers, but just exposing a potential problem here. And again, this is something that you can talk to individuals about, or using the lesson plans, you can kind of come back after you've done the survey and see, dig down as a group and think what might be our sort of issues here, or perhaps on a staff level, you can be discussing this, professionally amongst yourselves as well. Again, coming at this from a variety of angles is the way we would recommend that schools deal with this. Again, this is a breakdown for groups. So you've got a group report for students, again, showing the mean scores for each of the 4 areas of wellbeing. And then this is one of the reports that we suggest that are suitable for sharing with students. As you can see, we've taken away the numerical data. We're not ascribing a value to anything in particular. Instead, we are using just these little descriptive statements, these little vignettes, to explain for each of the strands of the assessment, what that was about, and generally how the student responded. And then the box at the bottom there just gives a little bit of general guidance and advice as to what to do if as a student concerned about this. Now, again, we've tried to make this into a very sort of sensitively presented and confidential report that students can keep to themselves. Or again, depending on how you view things in your school, you may wish to encourage discussion. But again, that's your policy, that's up to you. But again, we think these might be used in a variety of ways. There's also, I think if we move on to the next slide, Caroline, an overview table here, which just gives you a snapshot view of what each report is. I've galloped through there and I've told you an awful lot about the reports, but this little table at the within the handbook just explains what the report tells you and how suggests how you might use it. Again, moving on, we've got some resources that go with the lesson plan, with the wellbeing check. We've got some lesson plans currently broken down this way, and in the near future we hope we will have 16 to 18 resource as well. They're quite lengthy documents. We've got a lot of detail in there. It's about 29 pages, I think, in each of the booklets, and they can be used almost verbatim if you chose to. There's key vocabulary to use, activities, introductory activities, main teaching activities, and also there's 2 parts to this. So there's a lesson to introduce wellbeing and a lesson to follow up. And in that follow-up lesson, you may choose to make reference back to some of the reports, particularly the anonymized class report or group report or school report, and maybe just have those broader discussions with your students about how they're feeling and how as a group we're feeling. Again, what can we do to help each other, to support each other? moving on, please, Caroline, we can have a look at the various forms of support and guidance which are available to you. We've got the documentation that comes along with this, and you have access to the KEM customer support team, and also online support, which is there 24 hours a day. And how can we improve well-being in schools? Is our next question, our final question. Again, just some thoughts from me, thinking to things that I was doing when I was, back in school. I think this document, if I just check my date here, is from 2015, and again has been around for a few years and it's been updated a few times, but it's quite a useful document which describes 8 principles that you might use as a whole school or college to promoting mental health and well-being. And as educators, there are many things we can't control, but we can look at the things which are within our remit. And we need to consider whether our school policies and practices are doing all they can to support everyone in school. The whole school approach is almost certainly needed to support well-being, especially if we think back to that research that we referred to earlier. Well, easily accessible if you just search for that table on gov.uk, and you can find out what the model includes. If we go to the next page, you can see it's eight elements to it. Again, the print might be a little bit fine here, but again, when you get the slides or when you refer to that document, you might be able to see what there is in greater detail. But I've ringed there in red 3 of the areas that I think our Wellbeing Check or any other Wellbeing Check that you may be using could help you in your school. You might have one in place already, in which case, just ask yourself, can I use the information that I've gathered from the Wellbeing Check to help develop my curriculum, teaching and learning? Are there particular issues and problems that are coming out? We think it can enable the student voice and perhaps help to influence decisions from their point of view that you're making in school, and can help you if you are putting measures in place to support well-being by carrying out assessments before and after. That can help you monitor the impact of your interventions. Just off to one side there, that I'm just not, we can't say that our system would help staff development, but this comes up a lot whenever we talk to people about this. Do you have anything for staff development? Not yet. Cambridge as a whole is sort of thinking about what they might be able to do about this, but student well-being is one thing, but of course we must look after the staff as well, and without them being in a positive place, then we can't expect our students to be in a positive place. And just one other document that I'd just like to draw your attention to, if we move to the next slide, again another publication from the UK government, and again from that same website gov.uk that a lot of you will be familiar with, mental health and behaviour in schools. And it points out that of course schools have a central role to play here in promoting well-being and helping their students and staff to be resilient and to support their mental health and well-being. And in order to do that, clear systems and processes should be in place, particularly providing routes to escalate issues with clear systems of accountability. But underpinning all of that, and you will know this, and you don't need me to tell you that the culture and the ethos of the environment you work in has a profound influence on people and staff mental well-being. So what can we do to help? Well, within this document, if we go to the next page, again, apologies for the tiny print, and I don't expect you to read this, but I've just picked out 2 paragraphs there because it does acknowledge quite an important point, that school staff are generally not mental health experts and should not try to diagnose conditions, but they should have systems and processes in place for identifying potential problems and have routes available to them to escalate and make referrals. And there are things that schools can do for all pupils, and that's monitoring what's going on, using something like the Wellbeing Check. And we hope you might be interested in using our subscription to do that with the resources, or if you have a different system, using that to help you to monitor and intervene early to create safe and calm educational settings, and tackle problems before they become unmanageable. And just moving to the end of the presentation now, we've got the next slide, which just shows a little bit of guidance that we will be pointing to in some future documentation. But again, we're currently just finishing off an accompanying booklet, which just suggests some websites and some online resources that you might use with your students or your staff just to promote that positive, caring, supportive environment. In particular, we like the work we've seen from the Anna Freud Centre for Children and Families. Again, freely accessible with lots of nice material on there. So just picking out one example of a few which we'll be providing shortly. And just coming to the end of the session now, and we'll just look to the next slide and really just have a closing thought, is that if as a teacher, there's just one thing that you can do, and as a school leader, you can help to facilitate this. That's just to make sure that every student has at least one strong, supportive, professional and appropriate relationship with an adult in school. Because as we all know, when problems arise, feeling alone and unsupported can make you fairly desperate. And having that nurturing, supportive culture where there is somebody you can go and talk to is absolutely vital to dealing with the vast majority of these day-to-day experiences. And we hope, with our wellbeing check, that we can maybe shine a light on potential problems and allow you to deal with these things before they become too unmanageable. So thank you very, very much for listening. Apologies for the slight croakiness. And we've got two addresses you can go to if you'd like to find out more. We've got our Wellbeing Check general website there, first address. And then if you'd like to subscribe, you can see that the second link there is where you can head to find out more information, or leave your details with us. Drop your information into the boxes on the chat here, or contact us via our website or via this address. And I think we will try, between Caroline and I, to answer any of your questions that you might have. But just before we go, there's the references if you want to dig down and find out a little bit more about the original research that went into the development of the Wellbeing Check, or some of the resource documents there, the one from the Department for Education, then Public Health England and the DFE, both listed there as well. So thank you very, very much for listening. And again, if you have questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them.